Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Remnant Mentality Ministries Youth Sunday. My name is Marie Rogers. I'm so happy, so blessed to be here on this day, another day, Sunday morning. And I am so thankful and happy that you are here joining in this morning as well. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Uh, Look, I'm not sure what platform you're watching us on, but just to let you know, we can be found on YouTube, on Facebook, and on Twitter. So go ahead, and if you're on YouTube, make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the like button. Give us a thumbs up. If you're on Facebook, throw out the heart emojis. But more importantly, tell someone. Tell someone about Remnant Mentality Ministries. Let them know where to find us. Those, like I said, YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook. So let them know. Share, share, share. And whether they join in right now, if you have somebody and you just haven't come in, or you tell them about it, and then next week you let them in. Let them know, hey, we're here every Sunday morning, whether it's myself or Pastor Carolyn and her husband Gary. Someone is here every Sunday morning to go over, and we go over chapter by chapter. So again, we are in the book of Exodus. Okay, we're still in the book of Exodus. And by now we know Exodus means to exit, right? It means to exit. And we've covered it, right? We've covered how and when the Israelites were led out of Egypt by Moses under the authority of God, away from Pharaoh and this bondage of the slavery that they endured in Egypt. And then last week, Pastor Carolyn and her husband, Mr. Gary, they talked about the Ten Commandments. They went over those Ten Commandments that were revealed from God to Moses, for Moses to tell the Israelites, right? Went from not misusing God's name and honoring your mother and father, do not murder, steal, lie, and the others. And those were covered in there deeply. And what it was is those were hardcore. Those were like, if you do this, hey, this is going to happen. Those are the four sures not to do. And there's other laws that's going to come about, which is what we're going to go over today. But those were the actual Ten Commandments. And God wanted them to know, he wanted them to know that if they honor the commandments, excuse me, if they honor those commandments, he would honor them, right? And their prayers. And the thing that we have to remember is for the they had they were slaves, right, in Egypt. And so these Israelites, they didn't have like a system per se of laws that they would abide by themselves. It was all under the hand of Pharaoh, right? So they didn't have any laws to go by. And we remember what happened in chapter 18, right? When Moses, remember, his father-in-law came to visit, and all these people were out, and there was this long line from sun to sunset every day. His father-in-law had asked him, he's like, what is going on here? And Moses begins to tell him, he says, well, hey, they come to me, right? Like to really to give them answers, right? If they get into an argument or something happens, like they come to me, to inquire to God. They knew though, right? They knew that justice and judgment came from God, right? And they didn't have direct access, but they knew Moses did, so they would go to him. But it took up all Moses' assignment. His father-in-law even told him, he's like, look, like you're gonna get burnt out, or they're gonna get burnt out. Like you got to give it over to God. And so there needed to be laws in place so that the people would know if they did certain things, they would already know the result of their actions. They wouldn't have to go to Moses, right? That's what we're going to cover today in Exodus chapter 21. We're gonna cover these laws, the judgments, the sections judgments, right? And he says that these ordinances are to be set before them. We're going to see what those are, and as we go through them, the fifth and the sixth commandment really are what we're talking about here, right? Honoring your father and your mother. We're going to see the direct, I don't want to say the direct impact, but we're going to see what these laws say. If you do certain things to slaves, right, whether men or to women, we're going to see what happens when you do things to animals. We're going to see what happens that's going to cause an action of a result of death. We're going to see those two, the fifth commandment and the sixth commandment. We're going to talk about that here today. So it goes on, like I said, some of the background, we got to remember the Jews, they were permitted, right, to own slaves, but they were from other nations usually, right? And most of the time it was like from, prisoners of war. They were not allowed to enslave their own people. Now, even though when we're talking in this particular chapter, we're going to find out that they had servants, there's a key to it. When they were slaves in Egypt, they were slaves in forever, right? They didn't have an insight in mind. They were slaves. But here we're going to find out that their service is certain for a period of time. The law was set so that they couldn't enslave their own people, right? It says, if you must buy a Hebrew slave, he is to serve for 6 years. That's it. After 6 years, he goes. That seventh year, he's a free man. He didn't have to pay anything to be free. He's gone. He served his time. But what it says is, and maybe they want poverty, maybe they couldn't pay bills, and they said, hey, I'll do work for you to pay this off. Well, in a case like that, again, there's 6 years and they're gone for starting on that seventh year. If he comes there alone, if that man comes there alone, he leaves alone. So the seventh year, he goes away, he's done. However, if he arrives with his wife and his wife can leave with him. If he comes with his wife, he leaves with his wife. However, here's the kicker. If he came there alone and his master gives him a wife and she has, sons or daughters that are born while they're married, the wife and children technically belong to the master, because during that period of time, those servants, they belong to the master. So, and as property, so the wife and those children belong to the master. The man can still leave when his time is up, when that 6 years is up, but the children and the wife, they must stay there to the master. However, if the servant declares, hey, I love my master, I love my wife, my children, I don't want to leave as a free man, he can do that. He has that right according to this law. But this is what has to happen. The master has to bring them to the judges, right? To God. They bring him into the door. These judges will he has to go to the be taken to a door or to a doorpost. His master has to pierce his ear with this sharp pointed tool instrument, right? And he will serve his master for life. Now at that point, because he had a chance to leave, he just chose not to. For a noble reason, he said, hey, look, I got married. Here's my wife. We have children. I don't want to leave them here with you and leave. So for him, it was noble. But it kind of marked like the servant as a refusal of liberty. And I looked at a couple of those things from different commentaries. I'm telling you, I'm coming out of the Christian Standard Bible, but several other commentary I kind of looked. But that's what that mark it served as, like a refusal. The intent was not for them to be slaves. God had just brought them away, brought them out from being slaves. Like, hey, you served your time, 6 years. You have a chance and this opportunity to be a free man, and you chose not to. That's not the plight. That's not what God wanted for them. Now, when a man, and it could be let's say a poor man, a man that doesn't have a lot of money, maybe he comes and he sells his daughter, right, as a concubine or another servant. And we remember the concubine was someone who was not the wife, right? So if this man sells his daughter to the master, the father, not the husband, but her father will receive the sale price without her husband having to pay a large sum of money. So the money that the master will give, it goes to her father, but then her husband, before they used to have to come up with large sums of money, and some of them didn't have it, right? Heck, they were already poor, so they probably have to go borrow it just to get some, just to pay, or the husband doesn't have to pay this large sum of money. But she can't leave as male slave. So she's not there for just 6 years and then she leaves. It doesn't work that way for the women. What happens is, if she's displeasing to her master, so if she's not satisfying the master's not happy with her, if he chose her for himself, You know, if the man brought her there and the master chose to keep her for himself, then he has to let her be redeemed. He can't sell her to foreigners, you know, for her to be mistreated, because it was his reason. It's his own reason why, you know, he is being treacherous to her. It's his reasons why. So therefore she stays there. Now, if he chooses her to stay there or give her to his son, he must deal with her accordingly as customary for daughters. So in this particular segment here, we can see that God he's taking care of these women. It's not like you're gonna, because these are still his children, right? You're not gonna just take her, do whatever you want with her, or you don't like, you're not satisfied with her, you shift her off to some foreigners. No, God says you're still gonna take care of her, right? So even if he says, hey, you know what, I don't want you, he gives her to his son, she still has the same rights, right? She has to be taken care of as far as her food. He can't reduce her food, you know, not give her food or give her less food or clothing. And he can't take away the marital rights of the first wife. So all those things, even if he gives that servant to his son, she still keeps those same things. If for some reason he does not do those three things, and it says the three things, it doesn't say one of the three things. If he doesn't do those three things, she is able to leave free of charge. There's no payment needed. She doesn't have to go get some type of redemption. She's gone freely. So those are the things, those verses, verse 1 through verse 11, it shows us those things that about honoring your father and mother, abiding, what you have to do. And so these next few, we're going to talk about these capital crimes, these things, and directly with the sixth commandment of thou shalt not kill, right? We're going to find out what happens if that happens, right? I know, kind of weird. I said, what happens if that happens? We're going to find out what's going to happen here in these next couple of verses. It says, whoever strikes a person and he dies, that person has to be put to death. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That is the penalty. But it does say this: if they find that person did not intend to do any harm, and yet God would allow a place, an appointed place for him to go where, you know, he can flee there until he's found either guilty or innocent. Because here's the kicker here: the law distinguished the between intentional and accidental killing. So it's kind of like you're presumed innocent, right, before we charge you with being guilty. So there was a place, if this person killed someone, there's a place that he can flee until that happened. If a person is found to have schemed, you know, done these things in maliciously, if this was something that he planned previously, right? These acts that was against his neighbor to murder him, then he gets taken to the altar or taken away from the altar, and he gets put to death because he's found guilty. And that's what this law says. If a person strikes so that someone dies, they get put to death. So that's clear cut right there, right? Following this commandment, that it says, thou shalt not kill. It's letting you know right now. It says, whoever strikes his father. Now get this. It says, whoever strikes him, doesn't say kill. It says, whoever strikes his father or his mother must be put to death. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Whoever curses his father or curses his mother must be put to death. So just remember that case. And we're not saying that you're going to be put to death, but back then they had to have some type of laws. They had to have something for all these millions of people, because there's so many that Moses was trying to answer. He was trying to figure out, he was trying to do it for them. And it was just too many. It got too many. So they had to have something in writing. They had to know, oh, we better not do this. Hey, if we curse our mother, father, that means death. So I say this to you today. It is so important. And sometimes we don't always agree with mom or dad. It's important that we still obey them, right? We obey them. God's going to take care of the rest. We got to obey him. It's not for us. Now, unless they put you in harm's way. But this is what it's saying: not to curse, not to strike our father or our mother. It says whoever kidnaps, check this out. It says whoever kidnaps a person must be put to death, whether he sells them. So whether you take a person to give him to somebody else, or whether you take a person, you keep him in your own possession, whether it's using him as a servant, it's still the same as kidnapping. And we know, we learned in the eighth commandments is do not steal, not just property, right, that they're talking about, but people, because we are made in God's image. So if he's saying, hey, not to steal this just property, hey, we're more to him than property. So that is a crime that is punishable by death automatically. Now, these next couple of verses, we're just talking about some injuries here, right? Because up until this point, we've been talking about flat out death. You do something and the end result is someone dies. We're going to talk about some injuries here. When these men are scuffling or quarreling, they're arguing. And let's say one of them strikes the other one with a stone or with his fist, and the injured man, he doesn't die. So let's say one man hits another one. The man doesn't die, but for some reason he's confined in bed. He's injured so bad that he has to stay in the bed for a certain amount of days. Later on, he gets up. This man gets out of the bed and he's able to walk around. The person that strikes him, they're exempt from being punished. However many days this man was unable to work, he has to be paid. He has to be compensated for that time. And also he has to be provided complete recovery. So while the person doesn't get punished, like gone to jail, or he gets stoned, or he is punishable by death, he does have to pay for any loss of inactivity. So however many days he couldn't work. And again, like I said, he has to be provided with a complete recovery. Now, if a man strikes a male or female slave with a rod, so this is a slave, and this is important. We're going to bookmark that because I'm going to go back to this. It says, because he distinguished this here, this law. If a man strikes a male or female slave with a rod and the slave dies under his abuse, the owner must be punished. He must suffer vengeance. However, if the slave can stand up after a day or two, so again, if the slave can stand up after a day or two, the owner won't be punished, because technically that's his property. The slave is his property. So he would not be punished in that case if the slave is able to get back up. But when a man, and it could be men, 2 men, 3 men, however many men are in a fight, and they hit a pregnant woman, so a woman that's going to have a baby, and they hit her. And if that child, when they hit her, and they hit her and the child actually is born before it's supposed to be born, even if there's no injury, the one who hit her still has to be fined. And the fine is based off of the woman's husband's demands, right? Whatever the husband demands for that action is what they get, so long as the punishment fits the crime. So he can't go and ask for some astronomical things. He cannot go and say, well, I want him dead, because the punishment didn't fit the crime. The mother, the children are still alive. But if there's an injury, and the injury could be to the mother, to the child, or to both of them, then you must give life for life, eye for an eye. And I know some of us have heard these before, right? Tooth for a tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, bruise for bruise, or wound for wound. The thing is, sometimes we've heard it, and I remember many years ago when I heard this, it's almost like the law is promoting retaliation, and that's not the case. It really isn't the case. This law was made so that punishment given out by these judges, it was equal to the severity of the crime, right? So it's like I said, I'm not gonna, I punch you, hurt your shoulder, or you're in the hospital 2 days, and so I should die for that. That punishment doesn't fit the crime. It's exactly what I did to you, you can do to me, is what it is. And so again, it is most definitely not made out to be, we're going on this vengeance, we're going on this revenge. It's not that. It's merely punishment, but so that the punishment actually fits the crime. And you know for sure, right? If I know I don't want to lose my eyes, I'm not gonna hit you in your eyes. If it's certain things that I know I don't want to happen to me, I'm not gonna do them to you because that is what the law says, right? If I hit you, it's eye for an eye, life for a life. If I don't want that for me, I'm gonna leave you alone. And I don't notice. I would think that maybe that's also what they put it in for, to kind of enforce it, so people can look at it. If you treasure your own life, you're not going to take someone else's. However, if a man strikes the eye of his male or female slave and destroys it, and same thing if he knocks out the tooth of his male or female slave, then that slave, for either one of those incidents, whether, like I said, it's the tooth or the eye, the slave can go free in compensation for his tooth or for his eye. So no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If one of those two things happen, the slave is free to leave. That's his compensation. And that's what the law is saying is fair compensation. And this is for a slave. I bring that up because I was going to wait to the end, but I bring this up to say if we look at that, the one thing that we can get out of that is God is saying, look, every one of you is important to me. You're my people. And it doesn't matter if you're the slave or if you're the master or judge, you're all important. And that slave's life is just as valuable as the master's life, right? It is what we can take from that. Now, there's one other piece that we're missing here, right? Because we know just from the readings that we've had so far in these lessons, we have animals, right? And animals are important because animals do the work. And if these animals weren't available, work wasn't getting done. This is where they got fed from, right? So there had to be some law. There had to be some laws about the ox. Like what happens with the ox? Do they just run free when somebody kidnaps an ox, steals an ox, kills an ox? What happens? So if an ox gores, so if they bloody up a man or a woman, if they gore a man or woman to death, the ox must be stoned and its meat may not be eaten. But the ox's owner is innocent, right? So I have an ox. They go at this man or this woman, and this one man or woman has died. Well, guess what? It's not my fault. I didn't contain it, right? I didn't know what they were going to do, right? And even though that the ox itself, this bull, may not be capable of knowing what's right or wrong, that part doesn't matter. He did it. Again, we're God's people and we're valuable, right? However, if it's determined that this ox was in a habit of goring and its owner knew it, let's say the owner knew and he was warned, hey, you gotta watch him. Hey, don't let this happen again. If he's warned and he does not restrain that ox, he just lets him go at people, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox must be stoned and its owner must also be put to death, right? If instead a ransom, so let's say I have an ox and this ox goes in and it kills a man. That man's family can say, you know what? Hey, I know what the law says that the master must be put to death, but I want ransom. They can do that. The law says here that they instead of ransom is demanded of him, he can pay a redemption price for his life. He can keep his life. The family can say, hey, this is what we want for you killing our family or our family member. So the man could save his own life by paying the ransom to the victim's family. This payment was not compensated, it would be compensated for the offense, essentially. Now, if it gores a son or a daughter, he is to be dealt with according to the same law. But if the ox gores a male or female slave, here again, he must give 30 shekels of silver. In those days, it was a lot, right? This is about a pound of silver. Or to the slave master, and the ox must be stoned. So Look how important that is, right? Not only, and it tells us here for this slave, if the ox scores a male or female slave, he must give 30 shekels. This master have to give the 30 shekels, and the ox must be stoned. This was the price of a slave, which was for a large sum of money. It was a fairly decent amount. But when a man uncovers a pit or digs a pit and does not cover it, so he has this opening. Just imagine he's digging this opening. He doesn't cover it back up, and an ox or a donkey falls into it. The owner of the pit must give compensation, right? Because again, these ox, these bulls, they're important. They're doing work out there, and so now it falls in this pit. But guess what? They got to be compensated. That owner has to be compensated. He must pay to the owner, but the dead animal will become his. However, when a man's ox injures his neighbor's ox and it dies, okay, this ox dies, they must sell the live ox and divide the proceeds. They have to sell it. So if my ox kills another ox, that I have to sell my ox. I don't get to keep my ox too. So I have to sell my ox, and I have to split whatever I get for the ox. I have to sell it with my neighbor, since my ox killed his ox. So they must also divide the dead animal. They have to divide that ox. He doesn't get to keep it like they did in the first case. If, however, though it's known that that ox was in the habit of goring, if this was his thing, going and bleeding up people, and the owner has not restrained it, the owner just let him have his way with people, he must be compensated fully for the ox. For an ox, the dead animal will become his. That ends all the verses. So that's the end of this chapter. But I did, like I said, I want to point out that this chapter just showed God's intent, right? One, he did not intend for us to become slaves and stay slaves after he brought the Israelites out of Egypt. He also tried to show just how much he respected, how much he loved people, us, right? He didn't want hurt and pain and us to kill and destroy each other. That wasn't the intent. He wanted to know, hey, there's a punishment for that. So there's a lot of things that we can take out of these laws, and the laws were necessary because without the laws, even today, without laws, people would just do whatever they wanted to do, right? Because doesn't say I can't do this, so I'm going to go ahead and do it. So that's why it's important. It's important now, and it was definitely important then, and it relieved Moses of something. That Moses can oversee things, but they didn't have to come to Moses now and say, hey, this is what my neighbor did to me. What's going to happen? What should I do? Moses didn't have to worry about making all those decisions. The decisions were made already. Okay, so hopefully you learned something from this, just how important, how much God loves us. More than the animals. And animals are important too, but it also didn't matter. He loved slaves as much as he loved their masters as well. So enjoy the rest of your Sunday. We will see you next week. Enjoy. Thanks again for coming in. Goodbye.